The workshop smelled of oil and machine metal. Dust filtered through broken windows where shells had torn through the building weeks before. 3 Wehrmacht mechanics stood around a captured American truck, their uniforms still bearing the dirt of the Russian front. The vehicle itself was unremarkable at first glance, a GMC 2.5-ton truck, khaki paint faded and scarred from months of combat. But what these men were about to discover in that garage would crystallize a truth that German High Command had been desperately trying to ignore. It would answer the question that kept generals awake at night, and it would confirm what no one wanted to admit. Germany had already lost. The truck had arrived at the workshop in early 1944, one of thousands captured or recovered from destroyed American supply convoys across Eastern Europe. Wehrmacht Command had issued orders across all technical depots: examine everything, disassemble it, learn from it, find weaknesses, find advantages, find anything that might turn the tide. So the mechanics went to work. They began with the obvious: the chassis, the suspension, the basic structure. What they found didn't impress them. The frame was functional but nothing revolutionary. German engineering had produced equally robust vehicles. They moved to the engine compartment and began to look closer. That's when everything changed. The engine was a GMC 270 horsepower 6-cylinder, but it wasn't the horsepower that struck them. It was everything else. The precision of the machining. The tolerances so exacting they could barely measure them with their instruments. The quality of the steel, consistent, uniform, perfect. The standardization of every single component, every bolt, every bearing, every gasket, every hose connector. They were identical, not similar, not close enough, identical. The mechanic named Kruger ran his fingers along the cylinder head and exchanged a glance with the others. In German factories, no 2 engines were exactly alike. Craftsmen took pride in individual work. Variation was inherent. But this American engine seemed to have been produced by an invisible hand that never wavered, never tired, never made mistakes. They opened the transmission. Same story. Gears cut with such precision that each one could be swapped for another and fit perfectly. The differential, the axles, the steering components, every single part displayed a level of manufacturing perfection that shouldn't have been possible. Not in the quantities that America was producing. One mechanic, his name lost to history, whispered something that would become the informal conclusion of dozens of similar inspections across German-held territory. They're making these like we make hand tools. But there was more. They looked at the materials. The rubber used in the gaskets was superior. The wiring harness was covered in an insulation compound that they'd never seen before, more resistant, more durable, more reliable. The paint wasn't just paint. There was something in it. A compound, different from anything German engineers had formulated. They took samples, they analyzed, they tested. Every discovery led to the same inescapable reality. The Americans weren't just producing vehicles. They were producing vehicles with a level of consistency and quality that German industry simply couldn't match. Kruger made his way to the officer in charge and asked for permission to file a report. The captain listened. He'd seen enough of these reports to know what was coming. The analysis went up the chain of command, from the depot to the regional Wehrmacht administration, from there to Berlin, to the desks of men who had been receiving similar reports for months. Reports about captured jeeps, reports about captured weapons, reports about captured ammunition, each one telling the same story, each one adding to a mounting dread that no official strategy could dispel. The real revelation wasn't in any single component. It was in what the components represented. This truck was mass-produced, not as a showpiece, not as an elite weapon. As a standard vehicle, thousands were being built, tens of thousands, maybe more, and every single one would have the same precision, the same reliability, the same consistency. German factories produced superior craftsmanship, but they produced it slowly, carefully, with pride and individual attention, which meant limited numbers, which meant they could never compete with American volume. A German engineer named Porsche, no relation to Ferdinand, wrote in his analysis, "The Americans have solved the problem of precision manufacturing at scale. They have done what we believed impossible. Every component is perfect, and there are infinite components." That simple observation contained the entire tragedy of the German war effort. In 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, German engineering had been the best in the world. German weapons were superior, German vehicles were superior, German everything was superior. But superiority meant nothing if you were being buried under an avalanche of acceptable adequacy, produced in quantities that defied comprehension. One perfect German rifle versus 10 American rifles that were good enough. One perfect German tank versus 20 American tanks that were good enough. One perfect German truck versus hundreds of American trucks that were good enough. The GMC trucks kept arriving at the workshop. Each inspection yielded the same conclusions. The Wehrmacht's logistics network ran on captured American vehicles because there simply weren't enough German trucks to go around, and the American vehicles worked. They worked in the cold Russian winters. They worked on the dusty roads of North Africa. They worked in conditions that would have destroyed less reliable equipment, because they were designed by people who had studied the mathematics of mass production, who had built assembly lines that could produce perfection at scale, something the German industrial base had never managed to accomplish. By 1944, the situation was becoming impossible to hide. German generals understood the mathematics. America was producing 5 times the tonnage of supplies compared to Germany. 5 times, which meant American armies could be 5 times as large, 5 times as well fed, 5 times as well armed. And they would only grow larger as more factories came online, as more workers came to the assembly lines, as the American war machine accelerated toward its full capacity. The captured GMC trucks weren't just vehicles. They were physical evidence of a war already decided by geography and industrial capacity. General Ludwig Beck, a Wehrmacht strategist, sent a memo to High Command in late 1944. It began with a single sentence. "The American truck has shown us the truth we cannot escape." The memo went on to detail what the mechanics had discovered, but more importantly, it articulated what those discoveries meant. Germany could still win tactical victories, could still inflict losses, could still fight with courage and skill. But Germany could never win the war, because Germany could never match American production. The GMC truck had become a symbol of this impossibility. Rommel, the famous desert general, received similar reports. He understood immediately what they meant. In his diary, he wrote, "We are not fighting against American soldiers. We are fighting against American factories. And factories do not retreat. Factories do not break. Factories do not feel fear. Factories simply produce day after day until they have buried you." But there was something else the German mechanics hadn't fully articulated, something that went beyond numbers and industrial capacity. The GMC truck represented something almost philosophical. It represented a belief in what was possible. American engineers believed they could mass-produce perfection, and they had built organizations around that belief. Manufacturing processes, quality control procedures, standards, consistency. These weren't luxuries. They were foundational to the American war effort. Meanwhile, German factories still operated under the old model, the master craftsman, the individual worker taking pride in his work. Quality through human attention rather than systematic process. In a strange way, the GMC truck represented a victory of American pragmatism over German idealism, The Germans wanted to create the perfect weapon. The Americans wanted to create enough weapons. The Germans wanted elite soldiers. The Americans wanted millions of soldiers. The Germans wanted masterpieces. The Americans wanted adequacy reproduced infinitely. By early 1945, as the Soviet army pushed from the east and American forces pushed from the west, the GMC trucks were everywhere in German hands. Hundreds of them, thousands, commandeered from destroyed convoys, captured in tank battles, salvaged from abandoned depots. The Wehrmacht ran almost entirely on American logistics. German trucks were long gone, destroyed, lost, cannibalized for parts. What the Wehrmacht army was using to supply itself was almost entirely American equipment, which meant that Germany was literally fighting its own war using American industrial capacity. Kruger, the mechanic who had first examined that truck in 1944, survived the war. He was captured by American forces in May 1945. During his interrogation, he was asked what he thought about American equipment. He paused for a long moment. Then he said something that would be recorded in intelligence reports. "You didn't beat us with better weapons. You beat us because you could make weapons that were good enough for everyone. We made weapons so perfect that we could never make enough of them. That was our defeat. Not on the battlefield. In the factory." The GMC truck that had started it all was eventually destroyed in the chaos of the final months. Blown up, or left to rust, or dismantled for parts. Its fate didn't matter, because the message it carried had already spread, through German technical circles, through the Wehrmacht High Command, through the calculations of generals who understood that the war was already decided, not by any single battle, not by any brilliant strategy, but by the simple fact that America could produce trucks. Perfect trucks, infinite trucks, trucks that just worked. When historians analyze why Germany lost World War II, they focus on many factors: strategic miscalculations, the failure to defeat Britain, the decision to invade Russia, the two-front war, racial ideology that destroyed German science and industry, the targeting of German civilians by Allied bombing. All of these were crucial, but there was also something simpler. Something that could be held in your hands, something that German mechanics could touch and understand immediately. It was the realization that perfection at limited scale could never compete with adequacy at infinite scale. That was the lesson of the GMC truck. That was the defeat written into every component, every bolt, every bearing, every perfectly machined surface that represented hours of German engineering and craftsmanship. In another world, at another time, German precision might have meant victory. But in the industrial war of the 20th century, precision without scale was just a beautiful way to lose. The American truck drove through Europe carrying supplies for the armies that would destroy the Third Reich, and wherever German soldiers saw it, they understood. The war was already over. The GMC truck had made sure of it.